where we left off the other day, we were still talking about Maria Gimbutas's Krugen hypothesis, and we had looked at the first two of the maps. I think we briefly discussed this third one. Remember, the first map has the Indo-European homeland essentially being, let me kill these lights a little bit more. Essentially being right in this area, okay? Caucasus Mountains, Black Sea, Caspian Sea. This is the southern steppes of Russia. It's generally flat grassland. There are woods, there are streams, rivers, etc., etc. But she posits that is the main central homeland, if you want, out of which they all distribute. That's beginning around 4500 BC. Okay, so this third map brings us up to 1800 to 1200 BC. So if you go from the 4500 to the 1200, it's about 3,300 years. Okay, 3,300 years for those migrations to get from this little area to, well, all the way over here, not quite to the British Isles, but to modern-day Germany, southern Scandinavia, all of Poland, what would today be Poland, most of the Ukraine, modern-day Ukraine, but notice not all the way into far northern Russia. All the linguistic groups spoken in those areas today, all Indo-European, with one big exception, okay? Two big exceptions. One of them here in Central Europe, and one of them, it's a horrible map because it's all stretched out of position. One of them right here in modern-day Finland. Finnish and Hungarian are not Indo-European. They're their own group called Finno-Ugric. Right? How Hungarian ends up essentially right in here, totally surrounded by all these Indo-European, we have no idea. Okay? There is another non-Indo-European language in contemporary Europe, but it is right in this area between Spain and France, Basque. Basque, according to linguistic scholars, Basque isn't related to any language that we know of. It's not related to Finno-Ugric. It's not related to the Indo-European languages. It's not related to Semitic languages. It's just different. Okay? Some have actually even postulated, and the Basque speakers obviously, don't like this idea, that Basque may be how do I put this? A long descendant of whatever it was the Neanderthals spoke. Now, why would a Basque speaker not like that? Because you're saying you're descended from Neanderthals. The rest of us aren't descended from Neanderthals. Yeah, we all have Neanderthal DNA, whether you like it or not. We all have Neanderthal DNA, but we're related from modern man, not Neanderthal. Neanderthal is a little bit older and slightly, poor stepchild, so to speak. Okay? So, notice how wide the distribution is. Okay? And one of the reasons she, makes the argument is you see a lot more of the Kurgans, the burial mounds, in here, but then they start spreading. Okay? But there are other reasons. There are linguistic reasons. There's other archaeological data. If you're at all interested in this, I can point you to some articles and some books. It gets really, really interesting. And I meant to bring in a book today, and I forgot to. we'll do it Tuesday. Okay, Colin Renfrew. Next theory. All right. Colin Renfrew is a British academic, archaeologist, anthropologist. Gimbuta is an archaeologist, anthropologist, linguist, or linguistic archaeologist. Her main field is archaeology, but her subfield, let's say, is kind of more linguistics. Renfrew is more pure archaeology, anthropology. Okay, if I remember correctly, I might be oversimplifying that. Anyways, Renfrew places the central homeland for Indo-Europeans right here. Okay? Eastern, today, modern Turkey. He says that the migrations began almost 3,000 years earlier than what Gimbuta suggests. Right? Around 7,000 BC. And those migrations were peaceful. That is, the original, according to Renfrew, the original Indo-Europeans started to spread out of Anatolia because of population growth. They outgrew that area, so they had to spread. They had to move into more territory. That's not part of Gimbuta's theory, dealing with the Kurgans. In the Kurgan theory, go back to it for just a moment, even though these people were, north of the Pontic and Caspian steppes, they were nomads. Okay? At the beginning, they were nomadic peoples. They moved their goods on carts, four-wheeled carts. We have that archaeological evidence. Okay? They had a sophisticated religious system, sophisticated belief in the afterlife. That's why they have big burial mounds, okay, where they buried stuff with the bodies. We've got a number of burials where you have horses buried with the chieftain, and we know that the person's a chieftain because of all the grave goods associated with that grave, etc., etc. Okay? They were also warrior people in the Gimbuta theory. And there's some surviving evidence for that, like swords and spear points and such. Okay, that survive, but also the ideology, and the ideology is based upon reading of the myth that develops from that you can compare across all Indo-European groups. Okay, back to Renfrew. Renfrew's idea is that they're less martial than Gimbuta says they are. In that the spread is peaceful. Gimbuta's theory about the spread is it's military, it's conquering. So they start off in this little area. They see these people over here. They've got nice land. They've got nice cattle. Take them. Well, there is a mythic trope that shows up in almost all myths of all Indo-European groups, and it's cattle raiding. Okay? It seems to be a constant among all the linguistic groups that descend from the Proto-Indo-Europeans. This idea of raiding your neighbor's cattle. In Ireland, in fact, you've got a whole myth built around this one guy's cattle raid. Cattle, raid of Cooley, etc. Okay? So, why Anatolia? Well, there's a variety of reasons. Okay? Among farmers, and one of the reasons that Renfrew places it here is the oldest known attested form of surviving Indo-European, that is the earliest known surviving form, is Hittite. Where do we know the Hittites from? The Bible, the Old Testament, talks about Hittites. Prior to the 20th century, nobody thought the Hittites were real. Nobody thought the Hittites were an actual, real group of people. Nobody meaning 19th century scholars and such. Yeah, people who believed the Bible in the 1600s, 1700s, you know, they read the Old Testament and everything was true, so to speak. Okay? But beginning in the 19th century, it was, we have no proof these people existed. Until the early 20th century, there was a discovery, an archaeological discovery, in a place called Ebla, where a library was discovered. Now, we think of a librarian as what? Well, I shouldn't say that, because I think of a librarian, it's probably different than what many of you think. Because many of you probably think a library is a place where you can go for information science studies. And you can go and you can find all kinds of databases. No, a library is a collection of books, okay? But they didn't have books back in the Hittite period. What did they have? Cuneiform tablets, okay? In Ebla, a library of cuneiform tablets was discovered. I think the number is something like 10,000 fragments, 10,000 pieces of cuneiform. And it was in Hittite. It refers to Hittites all throughout. It's like Ebla had been, that's its kind of modern name. The ancient name, and I don't remember what the ancient name for it was like the capital of the Hittite kingdom. And the Hittite kingdom was pretty big, which is why it's mentioned so prominently throughout the early part of the Old Testament. Why? Because the Hittites are coming from up here. Here's Phoenicia, Tyre, Sidon, Levant. What is that? Palestine. Okay? Ancient Israel, etc. So the Hittites are coming down, and the Israelites are fighting them, etc., etc. Okay? Now, an interesting little side note. In the 19th century, a linguist named Ferdinand de Saussure, he's the one who is responsible for the development, or he's the one who's responsible for what in the 1960s became known as deconstructionism. Okay, he is a formalist linguist. That is, the forms of language, etc., are important. Anyways, de Saussure posited, on the basis of studying Indo-European linguistics, which remember was a fairly new quote-unquote science at that point, in, I think it was the 1880s, I don't remember the exact date, he posited as a 20 or 21-year-old, he's really young, he posited that the original form of Indo-European would have had these sounds that are called laryngeals. That is, they're formed way back in the throat, like near the larynx. Okay? These are laryngeals. The problem with it, he posited these sounds existed. The problem is they don't exist in any other surviving Indo-European languages. Okay? You have them in Sanskrit, or you have evidence of them in Sanskrit. It doesn't actually survive in Sanskrit. So he said the earliest form would have these. Tablets of Ebla are discovered about 20 years later, and they have them. That is, Hittite preserves these laryngeals. Okay? So, Renfrew, on the basis of that and some other evidence, says Hittite must be the earliest form of the language. Wouldn't it make sense, part of this is just logic, wouldn't it make sense that that, therefore, is closer to the homeland than something way up here, which means Hittite has to break off really early and separate itself? Possibly. There's another issue, however. Hittite and the Germanic languages share one thing that none of the other Indo-European languages have. They both only have a 2-tense verb system. past and present. Well, how can I say Germanic, aka English, doesn't have a future tense? What must we do to make the future tense? We have to add what's called a modal auxiliary, like will or shall. Yesterday I went to the store. Today I go to the store. Tomorrow I will go to the store. Okay? In Latin, you don't have to add an additional verb. You add a different ending, a different inflection to the verb. Hittite and Germanic are the only two that require an additional verb to indicate futurity, which must mean that way back in the Proto-Indo-European time frame, that is the beginnings of Indo-European, Germanic, what become the Germanic speakers and what become the Hittite speakers are close. Maybe that means they're geographically close as well as linguistically close. Maybe they kind of, if you've got a group of individuals, maybe these two individuals look a little bit more alike than all the others, indicating some more closer relationship between them. We think that's the case between Germanic and Hittite. Similarly, we think that's the case between Germanic and what are called the Balto-Slavic languages. Why? Because they have an ending in the dative plural that is the same that none of the other Indo-European languages have. Dative plural, third person, plural form of pronouns. I gave it to them. It's the ending. Germanic does that with all of its dative plurals, and Balto-Slavic does it with its dative plurals. We don't know why. An awful lot of this we can't answer. Well, why is it that way? Or why did that? No idea. It just is. Okay? So, what Renfrew suggests is here's the homeland, and here's what happens. You have one group, moves off this area. One group moves off that area. One group comes down over here. Crete, we're moving into the area of Greece and stuff. This is also Greece. There's Greece up there. One group goes up there into Bulgaria, Balto-Slavic kind of languages, etc. Notice, none of them go across the Black Sea. Why? Well, when you're talking 7,000 BC to 5,000 BC, guess what they probably hadn't invented yet? Boats. Okay? I mean, you're standing here on the southern coast of the Black Sea. You can't see the northern coast. You'd be a damn fool to get out on that open water when you don't know what's out there. Okay? Okay, so let's move off from Renfrew to Ivanov and Gamkrelidze's idea. Let me set that back up for the bottom part. Okay? And you've got a link in your notes, and you can read the article, the initial article that they base, where they explain this idea. I'm pretty sure they've since come out, because that was almost 30 years ago now. Because I remember when it came out. Pretty sure they've come out with a book since then, arguing this, okay? They place the Indo-European homeland just south of the Caucasus Mountains. Remember, Gimbutas puts it north of the Caucasus Mountains, all right? Between the Black and the Caspian Seas. Well, here's the Black Sea. Here's the Caspian Sea up here. So, in this area right here, what is this area today? So, that's the positive homeland. That is modern-day Armenia. Azerbaijan is right nearby. Georgia is nearby. Not Atlanta, but the real Georgia. The much, much, much older Georgia. Okay? And they suggest this process is how the languages spread, how the people migrated, how they moved out. Notice, they moved out through here. Okay. You got the Arabian Gulf, you got the Tigris and Euphrates, so Iran over here, Iraq over here, okay. Kurdistan up in this area. Okay. So they move over this way rather than straight through the Caucasus Mountains. And you move off to this, and you've got the Persian languages. You move over here, you've got the Indian languages, Sanskrits, Prakrits, Hindi, Bengali, etc. You've got Tokaria or Tokarian, A and B, way out in the middle of the Gobi Desert. We have no idea why those people went over there, but they are definitely Indo-European. In fact, we may not talk about them today. We probably will, which means I might have to try and pull something up on the internet. And then you move north around the Aral Sea, and notice it swings over to the Germanic area. Well, what's breaking off probably up at the top? Balto-Slavic. Okay? You have this, Doric, that's ancient Greek. Okay? So, you can read that. Migrations and cultural diffusion carried the Indo-European proto-language from the homeland, fragmented into dialects. Some spread west to Anatolia. Okay? Greece, other southwest Iran and India. Most Western languages stem from an eastern branch that rounded the Caspian Sea. Contact with Semitic languages in Mesopotamia with Kartvelian languages in the Caucasus led to the adoption of many foreign words. And then I have that comment. Most scholars now accept the Krugen hypothesis or a modified form of it. That is, that doesn't mean nobody believes or nobody accepts Renfrew's theory. Some do, but there is so much evidence for the Krugen hypothesis. That is, so much archaeological evidence. That's not linguistic. That is, we don't have anywhere, we don't have any surviving inscription of Proto-Indo-European. In fact, every time you will see in your textbook an Indo-European word, it's prefaced with an asterisk. Why? That means it's reconstructed. This is the form of the word, or this is what we believe the word looked like using the modern English/Italic alphabet. Okay? But it doesn't survive anywhere. If you want to go to the earliest surviving Indo-European words, you got to look at Hittite, and then Old Persian, Avestan, okay? The Vedic scripts of India, because those are older than Germanic. The earliest surviving Germanic is from relatively about 200 AD, which is pretty late, and that's in runes. Okay, Italic, well, Latin goes back 600 BC, about the earliest. Greek goes back quite a bit longer than that. Celtic, you don't have much surviving Celtic stuff before 200, 400 AD. Why? The Celts apparently didn't think writing was important. If you know anything about ancient Druids, okay, how did they pass on their learning? Oral tradition. It was all recited. They didn't write it down. All right, let's back up for a moment. Comparative linguistics, because that's what the homeland stuff, part of it at least, is based on. Comparative linguistics. That is, you're comparing the languages of the Indo-European group, so you're comparing Sanskrit with Germanic, with Baltic languages, and Slavic languages, and Celtic languages. You're doing that for what reason? Well, if you start down here, and I've got a book, I can bring it from my office, with 100 words. It's 100 words, 100 modern, quote unquote, Indo-European words, and it traces each word back to its origin. So if you start off with all these words, what do you start to do? You start like a linguistic, or excuse me, like a genealogical family tree. You know, children, use my family, 5 kids from 2 parents, each of those 2 parents, 2 parents, each of those 2 parents, and you trace all the way back. Modern, today, we can do what with us? Not linguistically, genetically. Sign up for 23andMe. Sign up for Ancestry DNA.com. You can get your DNA checked, and that DNA will tell you what? That DNA analysis will tell you what? It'll tell you a percentage of where you come from. Okay? Some of those percentages are down to the, you've got 0.1% Eastern European, or you've got 0.2% Sephardic Jew. A lot of people do this and I go, oh my God, I didn't realize I was. Because it shows, not 100%, everything spelled out, but it gives you an idea. This is applying the same kind of methodology, but to language, okay? So, the comparative method. Sound changes throughout the Indo-European language, and I'm going to put some other things up in a moment. Verb endings in Indo-European languages, such as, look at, this is just one. The Indo-European root, S, to be, okay? So, Old English, Gothic, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and then the Indo-European posited ending, what that ending looked like. How do we end up with me as the ending for first person singular? Well, by looking at first person singular form of the verb to be across all the Indo-European languages. Go back to Sanskrit. It's one of the earliest. Osmi. Greek. Not quite as old as Sanskrit, but pretty close. Me. Well, right there, what do you see? Me. Greeks over here, your perspective. Greeks over here, where's Sanskrit? A couple thousand miles away over here. Okay? In India. Not even Persian, India. Okay? Latin, sum, where's the difference? You don't have a vowel on the end. But you do have the sound. Okay? Gothic, you don't have the vowel on the end, but you do have the Old English, Modern English, am. Is it am? I am. Okay? Gothic, sum, so. 2 of those have E on the end, but 3 of them don't. So why are we suggesting that Proto-Indo-European ending had E? Because this is a very simplified chart. If you were to look at more Indo-European languages, you would see a preponderance of that vowel at the end that you don't see, because this shouldn't, in one sense, this shouldn't be included. Why? It derives from this. So maybe throw a Celtic, and I don't know what the Celtic is. So second person, I am, you are, he, she, it is. Ert is, S-A-E, Aussie. Again, Aussie. Why? One reason is this is one of the earliest forms. Okay? Much older than Greek and Latin and Gothic. Surviving forms, that is. We can read Sanskrit that was written about 2000 BC. We can't read Latin that was written that old. Why? It didn't exist. We can't read Greek from 2000 BC. Wasn't there. Gothic definitely wasn't there. We don't think Germanic actually developed as a quote-unquote full-blown language until sometime in the first millennium BC, 800 to 1000. Okay? Ist, est, esti, asti. Notice the ending all T, but notice what they all have at the beginning that not all of these do. They all begin with a vowel, and they all have a st in them, except for modern Old English with the t. Plural. Senden, sium, sumus, esmen, smas. So even those, the root seems to have a s followed by a vowel with that exclusion. Okay? So look at the endings. So this is the comparative method. You take these words like this and compare them. Let me show you a different one. Let's look at this one. And I've got a bunch also in the notes, I think. So, this is looking at the word for night. It's only looking at it in 4 languages. Okay, but that kind of gives you a pretty good appreciation or an ability to see the similarity. Nachts, nox, nus, vak. Whoa! N, 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 v. That's a sound change. That tells you where Sanskrit has a v initially. What are Gothic, Latin, and Greek almost certainly going to begin with? N. Okay. Nox. Okay. Different cases. Nominative, genitive, ablative, dative, accusative. We'll talk about these in just a moment. So, nothing for dative, so let's skip that one and go on to accusative. Nacht, noctem, nukta, vakam. So, you have the root form here. Notice positing that the root had the n, not the v. That's suggesting that because the preponderance of surviving modern Indo-European languages have this, where Sanskrit has this is a change. It's Sanskrit, the progenitors of Sanskrit, that introduced, for some reason, v. Why? Maybe when the early speakers of what became Sanskrit moved into India, whoever was in India then had a v sound that modified or influenced it. Okay? So that's just giving you the comparison. Look for a moment at the cases. Indo-European had 8 cases. That is, nouns could take 8 different forms. Or take 8 forms if you want. Some of the forms might be the same. So, nominative. We still have that in English. That's the subject case. Okay? I. Genitive. That's possessive. Dative, indirect object. And if you ever, take a foreign language that is highly inflected, it's always best to remember that when you're translating and you've got dative, translate it, whatever the word is, put 2 or 4 in front of it. Sometimes with, when I was doing Latin as a doctoral student, I did 2, 4 with every time I saw data. I just read those 3 words, and I'd figure out the context later. Okay? Accusative, direct object. Instrumental. We don't have the instrumental case anymore. You do have it in Latin. You have it in Old English. I'm going to, I'll try not to use a violent image. I'm going to write with the pen. Modern English, with the pen. Prepositional phrase, right? Okay? With the instrumental, the word for pen just has an ending on it. So you don't have with the. Right? Case used when an action is performed with an instrument, not a part of the body. In other words, you wouldn't say, I punched him with my fist, and with my fist being in the instrumental case, it has to be, something else. I hit him with a stone. Stone would be in locative case, but not hand. Okay? Ablative. Translated with the prepositions from, with, or by. In many languages, it becomes pretty much the same as dative. Okay? Vocative, classic example, when Shakespeare puts in the mouth of Caesar, et tu, Brute, the A ending. Because what is Brute's real name, Brutus. Okay? So the us gets replaced with a. What's he doing? He's saying, and you too, Brutus? Okay? Now, we kind of, I'm really hedging here. We kind of have this still today, but we do it by punctuation. We don't do it with an ending on a word. What do? You're writing somebody, you're sending an email or something, and you refer to that person by name within the body of a sentence. What should you do? And you, comma, Trevor, comma, should XYZ. The two commas, that is setting off the name, indicating kind of a calling out to that individual. Locative indicates where something's happening. So, in Latin, the word for home, domus, would have an ending on it other than the US. I think it's pretty much a E, right? Dome, right? What happens to all these cases in English? Today, how many of these cases do we actually use in the sense that we inflect a noun? We add an ending or take an ending off or change an ending. I went to the store. I went to the store with the boy. I hit the store. I bought the store. We don't change it, do we? Why? Our inflections have dropped off. The only place we really still have inflections, verb conjugations, not quite the same as inflections, prepositions. Excuse me, not prepositions, pronouns. But pronouns, they're not really inflections. They're different cases. Okay? Him, her, I, me, my, different cases. Different moods, different persons, etc., etc. Okay? Now, I think I can leave this one. Yeah, go back to this for a moment. So, 8 cases of nouns, Indo-European vocabulary. Let's look at this for a moment. And I apologize for the quality of this printout. This is a printout I did from some slides. I did a talk a couple of years ago to the linguistic group. These are some Indo-European cognates. Okay? So, words for mother, father, brother, three, and me. At the very top, I don't know if you can read, it's Irish. Mather, ather, brother, tree, me. So just go down the line and look at mother. Mother, French, male, Spanish, madre, Italian, madre, Portuguese, I can't read it, I think it's M-A-E, May, German, Mutter, Dutch, Mutter, Norwegian, Mor, Icelandic, Modir, Lithuanian, Mater, go down a little bit, Latin, Mater, Greek, Mater, and Sanskrit, Matar. What do you immediately see in almost all of them? Ma. With some kind of vowel. It might be an ah, it might be an o, it might be an a, okay? What else? Almost all of them have, not all of them do, have what in the middle? A t or duh. They've got some kind of, or the, they've got some kind of dental consonant. T, d, or th. In the middle. T, 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 th. Nothing. D, d, d. And we go back up. And we have, French, mer, Norwegian, more. Those are, and Portuguese, mer, are the only 3 that don't have it. Okay? Look at Look at father. Father, per, padre, padre, pi, vater, vader. Far, father. What? Levos? Where did hell? Pater, I can't pronounce that in Greek, and then patar. They almost all begin with what? Notice, can't say that, can you? They don't almost all begin with the same sound. You've got pretty good variation. You've got woo, it's a variation of. So those four essentially the same, but then we go back to why? Well, where do French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese all come from? Latin. Okay. But you got that consonant in the middle again, and ending for the most part with a vowel and a R sound. Brother, pretty much the same. Though where Spanish gets hermano from, I have no idea. 3, trois, tres, dry, drie, Dutch is different. Tre, threer, Icelandic, Norwegians, Dutch, German, English, they're all Germanic. So they're all pretty close. Okay. Don't think I need to do. Yeah, let's talk about this real quickly. So what have we been noticing there? Across some languages, you have what are called sound correspondences. Okay? That is, a lot of the languages have the same initial sound. Okay? Sometimes, where you see a p, however, in one language, what does that get replaced with in another linguistic group, like Latin p, with Germanic or va. Okay? Here's why. Now, this chart is copied from the American Heritage Dictionary of Indo-European Roots. Okay? And I'm going to put a page of this up in a moment, and it's exactly as nerdy as it sounds like. You got a bunch of unattested, reconstructed forms of words, and then what that word appears in a variety of modern Indo-European languages. Okay? And we're going to see how one little root, K-E-L, leads to a whole bunch of words that on first glance you would say, well, that's not related, but they're very related. Okay? So, zoom in so you can see that. I'm going to put a copy of this on the notes. Leave all the vowels, in fact, we can do this. Leave all the vowels aside from them because there's a lot of variation in the vowels. So, Proto-Indo-European sound on the left-hand column, etc. That's the sound. It becomes in Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, or the letter form representing the sound, Latin, Gothic, Lithuanian, Old Church Slavonic, Celtic. What in the world is IRNVE? I have no idea. And then Avestan, Old Persian, or a form of Old Persian. So notice, when Proto-European had a p sound, what does that do in Sanskrit? Stays p. Greek stays p. Latin stays p. Gothic changes to t or b. Lithuanian becomes p, stays the same. Slavonic stays the same. Avestan stays the same. It's because all of those are the same that it's postulated that Indo-European was the p. It wasn't the t. Why? Because that's the odd man in the group, so to speak. Okay? Ta, t, 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 z, or d, and then t, 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 and sometimes so t, k. Whoa. Sanskrit becomes s. But Greek it stays k. Latin it changes to t. Gothic it becomes or d. Lithuanian it stays t. Latin it stays t. Sorry. Old Church. Sorry, which one am I on? K. Lithuanian becomes sh. Old Church Slavonic. Celtic, even though it's spelled with a C, that's a k sound. Okay. And then you can go on down the line, and what this is showing us is when you see a word that begins in, let's say, Lithuanian with a sh sound, that's probably going to begin in Germanic languages with a h or g sound. Or it's going to begin in Greek with anything, PT or K, etc. Okay? Why is this important? Let's come back to here for a moment. So, division of Indo-European languages are based on the Latin and Avestan cognates for the Old English, for the Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European postulated word kuntum, 100. Okay? What is 100 in Latin? Quintum. It's spelled with a C, okay? But in Avestan, it starts with a S sound. That's why I had this up. Avestan, S. Okay? Latin, K. I know it's spelled with a C, but it's that. So, why break them out this way? Well, it's a nice division for one thing. It works. It's also nice because almost, big exception coming up, almost all of the Satem languages, if you were to look at one of those maps that I had up, of the Indo-European world, so to speak, almost all of the Satem languages are primarily over here in the east, and almost all the Kintum languages are primarily over here in the west. In fact, you can almost draw a line from Lithuania down to Greece. Okay? With Greece on the left-hand side, and I think Lithuanian, with Lithuania on the right-hand side, okay, and that represents a break between Kintum and Satem, with one huge exception. That group that I've mentioned a couple of times, Tocharian, who are way the hell out there in the Gobi Desert, about as far east as you can get. They're a Kintum language. Okay? So they should be on that western side of that imaginary line. So these are the branches of the Kintum, of the Satem Indo-European languages. Indo-Iranian, Indo, the languages of India, okay? Balto-Slavic, the Baltic areas, okay, and the Slavic languages, Armenian, and Albanian. So if you think of that map, use this. That's not a good enough map. Use this. If you think of that map, okay, let me pull this down so I can reach it. Lithuania is in this, so if you draw that map kind of like this, Lithuania is on this side, Greek is on this side. Pretty much the languages over here are Satem languages, the languages over here are Kintum languages, with the exception of Tocharian, which is way over here. Okay? So, back to where we were. The Kintum branch. And I did not include it on here because these are all major. Tocharian is not a major language. Okay? Hellenic, Greek languages. Italic, all the Romance languages. Celtic, all the Celtic languages, like Manx, Scots Gaelic, Cornish Gaelic, Welsh Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, okay, and the Germanic languages. Okay. Yeah. Let me turn this over for a minute. So let's look for a moment at the Germanic language chart. Well, let me do this first. Yeah. So I've given you this chart. You've got a chart like this in your book. I think mine's a little simpler. So you got the major breaks into Kintum and Sodom. Then you've got the Sodom language branches. And I've broken these down. So go farther east, Indo-Iranian, you've got Iranic and Persian languages. Indic, the Sanskrit and Prakrit. Okay, Sanskrit, a holy language. Prakrit is a more everyday form of Sanskrit, and it's from the Prakrits, really, that we get modern Hindi, Romani, and Bengali. Who speaks Romani? Who are also called, not Romanian, gypsies. Gypsies. Used to be thought that the word gypsy came from Egyptian. Nothing to do with it. Okay? So I'll go to the other side. Balto-Slavic, you got the Baltic languages. The Baltic language is divided into an east and west branch. The eastern branch is Latvian and Lithuanian. Probably Estonian is in there also. The western branch, Old Prussian. Okay? Old Church Slavonic. Take that line down. That divides into three geographical kind of areas. You got the south branch of Old Slavonic, okay, which gives you Bulgarian and, they wouldn't like this, Serbian and Croatian. Because there is no Serbo-Croatia today. There is Serbia and there is Croatia, the former Yugoslavia. Okay? Skip the eastern branch, go to the western branch for a moment. You've got Polish, and you've got Czech. It's not Czech. Oh, my daughter lived in Czech Republic for a few months. It's Czech and Slovakian. Okay. The east goes down to Russian. Well, what does Russian include? Go pretty much from the border of the Ukraine to China. It's the largest, national land mass in the world. Great Russian, Putin's Russian, if you want. Okay, Belarusian, White Russian, Belarus, the Belarus, Ukraine. That's an area. Sorry, it's a small area near Ukraine, and then Ukrainian. Ukrainians don't like this. I've got a friend who's Ukrainian. No, we're not the little Russians. Why? There was a Ukraine before there was a Russia. Maybe, what is the capital of Ukraine? Kiev. Yeah. Kiev is older than Moscow. In fact, the Russian, Rus, you know where they get their name from? It's not native. It came from the Vikings. What's it mean? Red. Not like red, commie red square, not that kind of red, but because of their hair. And, apparently when the Vikings met the Russians, they weren't, the blonde Nordic-y types. Okay, so where's my other? Go from there then to this map. Get out of here, 25 minutes. This is what we're more interested in than the other branch. Why? Because this relates to us. Okay? So you have the four major Kintum branches. Celtic, Germanic, Hellenic, Italic. Celtic. Let's look at it first. Okay? Furthest easternmost of the Indo-European group. Two branches to it. You got the Goidelic, or what's called Q Celtic, and the Brittonic, or what's called P Celtic. Well, who came up with Q Celtic and P Celtic? That's because where you have a K sound in Goidelic, you have a P sound in Brittonic. For example, look at what we get from Irish Gaelic, Manx Gaelic. Okay, down here, Breton, Welsh, Cornish. Well, if you've read anything to deal with Welsh mythology, you have so-and-so, op, so-and-so. What does the op, AP, mean? Son of. But, over here, what do you have? Op, or sometimes Mac, son of. Okay? Britannic, Continental, Gaulish, and Galician. Gaulish, what was spoken in ancient France. So when Caesar writes about his Gallic wars, he's talking about the wars in France. Okay? Insular, that is the form of Celtic spoken on the Isle, the main British Isle. Okay? Go to Hellenic. 3 major forms: Aeolic, Doric, Ionic, Attic. Attic, Athens. That's where we get modern Greek from. Okay? I don't have included in here Koine, which is, vernacular Greek of the New Testament, etc. Pretty sure it's along with Ionic, Attic. Italic, 3 forms: Oscan, Umbrian, or 2 forms plus Classical Latin. Classical Latin gives us vulgar. What's vulgar Latin? It's not, graffiti Latin in bathrooms and that kind of stuff. Vulgar simply means common, ordinary, everyday. Classical Latin, some would use the word devolved into vulgar Latin. Well, what was the vulgar Latin? Everybody in Rome spoke Latin. Not everybody in Rome spoke Ciceronian Latin. They didn't speak like Cicero wrote. Similarly, you can analogize from that. Everybody in Shakespeare's day spoke Elizabethan English. Not everybody in Shakespeare's day spoke the way Shakespeare wrote his plays. Or, a better example, everybody in 1611 England spoke Elizabethan English. Nobody spoke King James English. King James, the King James Version of the Bible. Why? Because that translation done in 1611 was intentionally archaic. It wasn't like a New International Version, standard of the Bible today, or some hip living translation that replaces all kinds of words with everyday ordinary colloquial speak. The translators were trying to achieve a mastery, a precision, and a beauty not of the streets. Okay, so it's that language. It's the language of the everyday street Latin that gives the modern Romance languages. That's why my Latin professor said, all the Romance languages are nothing but bad Latin. If you know good Latin, if you know classical Latin, if you can read Cicero in Caesar's writings, you can pick up all of these. Because the vocabulary is almost the same. Yeah, there are a few sound changes. Why? Because we've got a guy in 4 languages, now the Department of World Languages, Literatures, Cultures, etc., who teaches a course in the history of the Spanish language. And they go back to 800, 1000 AD, and Old Spanish, and you have Old French. We're going to talk about some Old French influence in English, right? Italian, Romanian, etc. Okay, go from there to, since I'm trying to get to the Germanic chart, and then we can go back to Germanic languages. Okay, this you have to know. You have to know this. In other words, if this shows up on an exam, you need to be able to fill in the blanks. They won't all be blank. Okay? Won't necessarily even be most of them blank, but it might be almost most of them. Actually, it might be 49%. You can figure out that. But you need to know this. You need to know the others too. I mean, the Kintum Sodom brunch, that may show up also with a few blanks. Okay? But this one, you really need to know. Why? Because it's really important for us. So, Proto-Germanic. When was Proto-Germanic? We can't say for sure, but probably sometime around 800 to 1000 AD. BC. 3 branches. Why? 3 geographical areas that we know this language broke off into. So let's look at the easiest one first. East. Think of modern day, or think of, use this map again, Scandinavia. Okay? You've got Scandinavia here, does not include Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany. All right? So think of this area. You have east, north, west, east. So east, Sweden. Okay? So what do we see there? East, you've got Gothic. Gothic, which gives us the Visigoths language, and Ostrogothic. These are the Goths who, raid and plunder Rome and such. Okay? Vandalic and Burgundian. Now, one of the reasons this side is easier, there's very little surviving material. But the oldest form of the Siegfried story, Siegfried and Brunhild, or Sigismund that we read in Beowulf, some of those names are mentioned in Vandalic and Burgundian. Vandalic, the Vandals. That's where we get the vandalized from. Okay? What we have of Vandalic and Burgundian is largely lists of names and some laws. That's it. Okay? Go to the northern branch and Old Norse. Old Norse divides into West Norse and East Norse. We saw Denmark and Sweden just to the north of it. They're related. Okay? West Norse, Icelandic, Faroese, and Norwegian. Where are the Faroe Islands? Here's Scotland. Here's Iceland. There are islands between Scotland and Iceland. You go even farther north and west, and eventually you get to Greenland. Okay? So Icelandic, Faroese, and then Norwegian. Why is Norwegian, notice, a West Norse language, but Swedish is an East Norse language? Look at this map again. Where are Sweden and Norway? Right there. And right here, you have what? A mountain range. A mountain range that separates Norway from Sweden. So, Denmark, Norway, they are linguistically similar, but Norway, Faroe Islands are right up here, Iceland's right over here. Why are these similar? Because the Faroe Islands and Iceland were settled by Norwegians, who didn't speak Norwegian then. They spoke what's generally called Old Norse. Okay? And it develops into separate languages. That's why West Old Norse develops into Icelandic Faroese, modern Norwegian. Modern Norwegian develops into Dano-Norwegian. It's like a cross between the two. And then what's called New Norse, New Norwegian, as opposed to Old Norwegian. Okay? Look on this side, the western branch. So we had the northern branch, the eastern, Vandalic and Burgundian, etc., Gothic. Last Gothic speaker, by the way, died in the early 18th century. Very last person who spoke real Gothic. Okay? And Gothic wasn't, if you take this map again, Gothic wasn't spoken. Gothic wasn't spoken up here. Gothic was spoken down in this area. Okay, in what are called the Balkans. Some at least were, because we're going to talk about a very famous bishop who was Gothic and why he's important and such. So, The west branch, you have high and low. Notice that's not divided even more geographically as in west, north, south. High, why high and low? High is what's called Hochdeutsch. Low is called Plattdeutsch. High, well, think of Germany. What's in southern Germany? The Alps. High. What's in northern Germany? Lowland. It's flatland. Low Deutsch. So low Germany, high Germany. So high, what develops from that is Yiddish. Yiddish is kind of a German Jewish language. It's in a hybrid of Hebrew and German, but it develops its own total language. And then modern High German, right? The low side, Low Germany, that is flat land, northern Germany, area of Saxony and that kind of stuff, gives us English, and then all these others. I should have moved this because I had to redo this in this class. I should have moved this over here because Frisian and English are the closest two on this whole branch. Okay? Old Saxon, modern Low German. You can read a poem in Old Saxon called the Heiland, the Lord. It's an early poem after the Saxons convert to Christianity. It's about Christ. Okay? Frisian, this is the language spoken. Is it included in here? Yeah, you'd have it. Language spoken on coastline right here and among islands right off the coast called the Frisian Islands. Because when the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes came to Britain in the mid-5th century AD, they didn't just sail across the North Sea. They hopscotched along the coast. That's why Old English and Old Frisian are almost mutually intelligible. And that's why English and Frisian are the closest two of the... that's why Frisian is closest to English of the Germanic languages. Old Low Franconian, okay, gives us Dutch, Flemish, and Afrikaans, spoken by the Afrikaners, who were what?
The settlers in...
Dutch settlers in South Africa. Okay, so that's the map that I wanted to give. Now I'll come back to here. Okay. This is where it really starts getting fun, if you're a sadist like me. Grimm's Law. You're going to see, actually, hold on just one second. Yeah, let me skip that slide for a moment, or that page, and come to this one. I don't know why I put it that way. We're going to come back to Grimm's Law in a moment because I've got Grimm's Law in here. All the Germanic languages have these 7 characteristics. Okay? Now, one of these characteristics you will see is actually shared with Hittite, the one about 2/10 verb system. So, what are the others? Shared, common, distinctive vocabulary. That is, there are words in Germanic that do not show up in, or do not have cognates, do not have sister words in any of the other Indo-European languages. Okay? And I'm pretty sure your textbook includes examples of some of those. Where do these words come from? Don't know. It might be that when the original Proto-Germanic settlers moved into that area of northern Germany, they picked them up from the locals. In other words, these could be native, what are often called Old European words. But we don't know for sure. Okay? What else? 2/10 verb system. As we've said, Hittite also has this. Okay? Past tense, preterite, also called preterite, and present. That's it. There is no future tense. We'll talk in a moment. Not today. Tuesday about possibly why. I don't think I've mentioned it here before. So how do we indicate past tense? We do that two ways, right? Depending on the kind of verb. Talk about that. Weak verbs use a dental suffix for preterite tense or past tense. Today I am walking to the store, or today I walk to the store. Tomorrow I will walk to the store. Yesterday I walked. The t is a dental suffix. Now, sometimes in poetry, that t ending will, because it needs to have a certain number of feet in the line, it'll be written like this. And it becomes walked or loved. Okay? Why don't we pronounce that walked? Why don't we pronounce that duh rather than t? Try saying it. Walked. You almost did that. Why? Because this sound with this sound are really hard to make together. Right? Now, that's one form, right? With the duh. What about, do we have any with that? Just that ending? Slipped. Spelled how? With a D. Slept. Kept. But you know what slept originally is?
Sleeping.
Exactly. Sleeped. Okay? But p and duh are formed at the same place in the mouth. They're real easy to say together. Slept. 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 And what do we do when we say that word slept? We're almost eliding over that. And I would bet you give us another 500 years, and it's going to be slept. Nope. We'll be left. Why? Language tends to, in some ways, simplify over time, but as it simplifies, it kind of complexifies in other ways, or gets more complex. Okay, what other way? This isn't one of the 7 things, but how else do we form past tense? We don't say swimmed, please, God. Swam. What kind of verb is that? What do we call that kind of verb today? Irregular, right? Because it's not regular. What is regular? N-E-D. When a child is learning language, learning how to speak, a child will say, I thinked. Because they don't know any better. Well, what is it though? I thought. So what happens with think to thought? Think, thought. You got a whole bunch of changes going on there, right? This drops out entirely. This gets added in, but what else has happened? You get this vowel change. Okay? Swim, past tense.
Swam.
Past participle.
Swum.
Swum. Drink, drank, drunk, not dranked. So why is it, if it's drink, drank, drunk, why isn't it bring, brang, brung? It's because of the kind of verb it is. Okay, that we'll talk about when we get to Old English. What else? So weak verbs form a dental suffix. All weak verbs in Germanic form past tense by adding a duh. Strong verb, however, the vowel changes. It's called ablaut. It happens in all the Germanic languages with all what are called strong verbs. By the way, these terms, weak and strong, they come from Jacob Grimm. He uses these, why? He needs a way to classify 2 distinct forms. And he just comes up with weak and strong. Why not male, female? There's a third, right? neuter, there's in between, but there is no third in between kind of form, okay, of classification, for the verbs. There's only two forms. He could have said positive, negative, just as well as weak, strong. It's not like one is, fighting for its existence and the other one, because actually the strong verb form is the one fighting for its existence. There's only about 60 strong verbs still in the English language. They're dying. They're all becoming weak forms. Drive, drove, driven, drive. You see this. I see it all the time. Drived. Okay? You see this all the time in the media. Why? Because journalists are idiots. Plead, like, to plead guilty, past tense, I spell it. P-L-E-D. I pled guilty. It's not so-and-so pleaded guilty.
Oh, you do hear that a lot.
I love fingers on a chalknail, fingernails on a blackboard. Don't bother me. That drives me crazy. Okay. Similarly, kind of, I was to the store. It's L-E-D. Because what is this? That is a medal. That is not a verb. Unless it's to lead. Okay? Someone by the nose or whatever. Rant over. Proto-Germanic had a system of weak and strong adjectives. So we have weak and strong verbs, weak and strong adjectives. Well, how do you know one's weak and one's strong? You look what's in front of it. That's how you know. So, adjective is weak if it's preceded by a demonstrative pronoun and or definite article. That is it. Tha, young and chairless. The young men. Okay? Se good king. The good king. Those are what? Okay? Adjective is weak when it is preceded by a demonstrative pronoun. Here's the adjective. Here's the adjective. It's preceded by a demonstrative pronoun or definite article. All right? Notice, in these examples, it means the exact same thing. No change in meaning. What's the difference? No definite article. Why not? It's not needed, actually. It's just, if there is a definite article, then what comes after has to be in the weak declension. And not only that is in the weak declension, but the noun form has to be declined in the same way. Just in these two examples, there's no change. So, an adjective can be weak or strong. It entirely is dependent upon context. Okay? And then I include this, because this is something modern students still don't seem to be aware of, or some don't at least. Remember, an adjective must always agree with the noun it modifies, in case, number, and gender. So, you take my fantasy literature course, and I talk about fantasy literature stories. And I start and I say these, and I want to indicate the class that these stories fall into. And you can use words like kind, or sort, or type. These blank of stories. What form does this, or this need to be? Plural. Why? There's two indications. This is plural, and this is plural. Okay? Similarly, the no, I take it back. I'm going to use that example. It'll be too confusing. So it's got to agree in those ways. We'll stop there. We'll pick up with the rest of Germanic characteristics on Tuesday, and we'll discuss Grimm's Law, because that will probably take a long time. We might